Ever get that feeling, where like your body is reacting to something, but you can't quite put it into words?
Yeah.
Like walking into a room and you suddenly feel tense,
Yeah.
or meeting someone's eyes and wanting to like shrink back.
Yeah.
So today we're diving into all of those subtle, often overlooked ways that our bodies react to power dynamics,
Yes.
privilege,
For sure.
and even oppression.
Yeah, and what I think is so fascinating about this is we often think about oppression in very abstract terms.
Right.
But this paper, Grasping and Transforming the Embodied Experience of Oppression by Rae Johnson, it really takes it out of the textbook
Okay.
and into our everyday lives.
Okay, I am so into the. So we're talking about how those everyday experiences, like we were just talking about, how they actually manifest in our bodies.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And the paper starts with this really, like, simple but powerful idea, which is that oppression is learned.
Okay.
Like, we aren't born with these prejudices.
Yeah. Which is kind of hopeful when you think about it,
Right.
because it means we can unlearn them too, right?
Absolutely. But here's the thing. This learning, this unlearning, it happens in our bodies as much as it does in our minds.
So it's not just about what we think, it's literally how our bodies react kind of instinctively.
Yes, exactly.
Give me an example. How does this actually play out?
Yeah, so think about a time that you felt powerless.
Okay.
Maybe it was an encounter with like a difficult boss,
Mm-hmm.
or even just being in a crowded room where you felt unseen.
Yeah.
Chances are your body reacted in some way. Maybe your shoulders slumped a little bit, or you avoided eye contact.
Oh, wow. I totally do that. And I never really connected it to like power dynamics before.
Right.
But it makes so much sense.
It's not random. These are learned responses that are often ingrained in us through years and years of navigating all these social hierarchies. And Johnson calls this nonverbal asymmetry,
Okay.
meaning that the way we use our bodies in social situations, it's not neutral.
Right.
It often reflects these like underlying power structures that are happening.
Okay, so nonverbal asymmetry. So meaning like someone in a position of power might carry themselves very differently than someone who feels less powerful.
Exactly. The person with more power
Yeah.
often sets the tone for that entire interaction.
Right.
So they might feel comfortable taking up space, making direct eye contact, even like touching someone's arm to emphasize a point.
Mm-hmm.
But someone in a less powerful position might like shrink back, avoid eye contact, feel uncomfortable if that other person enters their personal space.
So it's almost like all of those subtle cues, those almost invisible ways that we're kind of adjusting our bodies to each other,
Yes,
are actually like constantly reinforcing power imbalances.
precisely. And here's where it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
The paper argues that these repeated microaggressions, the ones we experience in our bodies, can actually be a form of trauma.
Trauma. Okay, because we usually think of trauma as like a single overwhelming event.
Right.
But you're saying these like everyday power dynamics
Yes.
can be traumatic too.
It's not always a dramatic singular event.
Okay.
The constant stress of navigating these subtle power dynamics,
Yeah.
of trying to fit into spaces where you might not feel fully comfortable or accepted,
That takes a toll over time.
it's like your nervous system is always on high alert,
Exactly.
even when there's no like obvious threat.
Exactly. And the paper really emphasizes that this constant tension, this feeling of never quite being able to relax or be your full self, it can manifest in physical symptoms like muscle tension, headaches, even digestive issues.
It's amazing how often we dismiss those physical symptoms or try to treat them in isolation
Right.
without even addressing the root cause, which is this like constant low-level stress of just like navigating a world that doesn't always feel safe or welcoming.
It's like our bodies are trying to tell us something.
Totally.
They're sending up these flares.
Yeah.
But we haven't learned how to like interpret the signals. Right. So how do we start listening? How do we become more aware of what our bodies are trying to tell us in these situations?
That's where somatic literacy comes in. And it's a big part of what Johnson offers as a path forward. And basically it means becoming more fluent in the language of our bodies.
I love that. Somatic literacy. I love that phrase.
Yeah.
It's like learning to read the language of our own bodies.
It really is. And just like learning any new language, it takes practice. It
Right.
takes attention.
Yeah.
But Johnson argues that this skill, this somatic literacy, it's crucial if we actually want to understand and ultimately transform how we experience oppression.
So where do we even begin? How do we go from feeling those subtle, often uncomfortable bodily sensations to actually understanding what they mean?
So Johnson lays out this really helpful framework in the paper. It's a four-stage cycle, she calls the cycle of embodied critical transformation.
Okay.
And it starts with simply noticing. She calls it the first stage, embodied experience.
So just paying attention to how our bodies are reacting in different situations.
Exactly. So instead of just like going through the motions on autopilot, we start tuning in to those subtle physical sensations. Maybe your heart rate speeds up when a certain person walks into the room. Or maybe you notice your jaw clenching during a really tense meeting.
It's like we're finally paying attention to those whispers from our bodies.
Yes, the ones we've been ignoring for so long.
Yeah.
And once we start to notice those sensations, we can move into the second stage, which is embodied critical reflection.
Okay.
And this is where we start asking the why questions.
So not just what we're feeling, but why we might be feeling it in our bodies.
Exactly. We take those physical sensations and we start digging deeper. What thoughts and emotions are connected to them? What's the context of the situation? Are there any patterns in terms of who you're with or where you are when you feel these sensations most strongly?
It's like we're detectives gathering clues from our own bodies.
Yes.
And what happens once we start piecing those clues together?
That leads us to the third stage, integrated distillation. This is where things get really interesting.
Ooh.
This is where we move from simply noticing and reflecting to actually extracting insights from our embodied experiences.
So we're noticing how our bodies are reacting, we're reflecting on those reactions, and then we're like pulling out the key takeaways.
Right. And here's the really fascinating part. Johnson says that sometimes these takeaways, they might not even be fully formed thoughts. They might be a gut feeling or an image that pops into your head, even a sudden urge to move your body in a certain way.
Wow. That's so wild. It's like our bodies hold this wisdom that our minds haven't even fully grasped yet.
Exactly. And by paying attention to those subtle signals, those flashes of insight, we can start to understand ourselves and our reactions to the world on a much deeper level. But it doesn't stop there.
There's a fourth stage
There's a fourth stage.
where we actually do something with these new insights.
Yes, the final stage is embodied critical experimentation. And this is where we take all that we've learned about our bodies, about our reactions, about the power dynamics that are at play, and we start experimenting with new ways of being in the world.
Okay, so this is where somatic literacy goes from being like a passive awareness to an active practice. Give me an example. How might this look in real life?
Let's go back to that example of, walking into a meeting and feeling yourself shrink back a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you've realized through reflection that this is a pattern for you. You tend to make yourself small in spaces where you feel less powerful.
I think a lot of people can relate to that,
Yes, absolutely.
especially in professional settings.
Yeah.
So what would an embodied critical experiment, what would that look like in that situation?
It could be as simple as consciously focusing on your posture. So instead of hunching over, imagine like a string pulling you up from the crown of your head. Take up space. Make eye contact.
So even if you don't feel confident on the inside, you can start by changing how you hold your body, which might actually shift how you feel internally.
Precisely. It's not about faking it. It's about understanding that our bodies and minds are constantly influencing each other.
Yeah.
And sometimes changing our physicality can be the key to unlocking greater confidence, presence, even power.
I love that. It's so cool. We're not just talking about understanding oppression, but actually experimenting with ways to feel more empowered in our bodies.
Right.
It feels hopeful.
Yes, it is. And that's the power of this work.
Yeah.
If we can learn to shrink back, we can also learn to step forward.
Yeah.
Literally and metaphorically.
Love that. And Johnson gives some really interesting real-world examples in the paper of how this plays out. Like we talked about earlier, someone in a position of power might feel very comfortable leaning back in their chair during a meeting.
Yes.
While someone with less power might instinctively sit up straight, hands clasped in their lap,
Totally.
taking up as little space as possible.
It's so true.
And it seems so subtle, but over time, those tiny adjustments can really impact how we see ourselves and how others see us.
Absolutely. And imagine the difference in how you would feel, for example, walking into a job interview if you were aware of these dynamics.
Ooh, that's such a good example. Because if you go into that interview already feeling nervous,
Yeah.
and then you're unconsciously shrinking down in your chair,
Right.
avoiding eye contact.
Yep.
It's just going to reinforce those feelings of insecurity.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
right.
But what if you consciously focused on grounding yourself,
Mm-hmm.
sitting up straight, making eye contact?
Yeah.
Even if the nerves were still there, you'd be sending such a different message,
Totally.
both to yourself and to the person interviewing you.
It's like we can hack our own nervous systems a little bit
Right.
by changing how we use our bodies.
In a way, yeah. It's not about like, being inauthentic. It's about understanding the tools that we have at our disposal
Right.
to navigate these situations with more awareness
Yes.
and agency.
This has been amazing, this deep dive. We covered so much. From understanding how oppression can actually be learned and held in our bodies,
Yeah.
to exploring those practical tools like somatic literacy and the cycle of embodied critical transformation.
I feel like I have a whole new lens through which to view my own experiences now.
That's amazing. And what's really exciting is this is just the beginning.
Yeah.
As you start paying attention to those subtle bodily sensations, as you practice somatic literacy in your own life,
Yeah.
you're going to discover even more nuances and insights.
So for our listeners who are ready to kind of like embark on this journey
Yes.
of embodied awareness,
Yes.
where would you suggest they start?
Start with curiosity. The next time you notice yourself feeling, uncomfortable or out of place,
Yeah.
just pay attention to what your body's doing. Are you holding your breath? Are you tensing your shoulders? Are you avoiding eye contact? And don't judge yourself, just notice.
It's like becoming a curious observer of our own physical experiences. Exactly.
Yeah.
And as you start to notice those patterns, then you can begin to experiment with small changes.
Maybe it's taking a deep breath before you're entering like a really challenging situation,
Yeah.
or consciously adjusting your posture
Hmm.
to take up a little more space.
Small changes, big impact. It feels empowering and liberating.
It is, because when we understand how our bodies respond to power, we can start to reclaim our own power from the inside out.
I love that so much. This has been an amazing deep dive. Thank you so much for taking us on this journey of embodied awareness with us.
Well, it's been my pleasure. Such a fascinating conversation.
And to our listeners, keep exploring that fascinating world beneath the surface. Until next time, embrace your power, one embodied breath at a time.